Entwined is a podcast about how so much of the world around us is wound or twisted together. This podcast strives to lay bare unexposed or indiscernible connections using historical and anecdotal sources. I am Elliot Gladstone, and alongside P.S. McKay, this is Entwined. You're out there doing it. I mean, really doing it. And it is hot. It is freaking hot. As you stand amongst the crowd, you realize the lake of sweat pooling around your neck and dripping down to the small of your back doesn't even begin to bother you. I mean, it is hot. We're talking surface of the sun hot. And as you stand there, surrounded by people, you know it is worth every gosh darn second. It's amazing. It really is. And the commonality of the moment, coupled with a funky closeness created by the thousands walking together, makes temperature an antiquated problem needing no remedy. This is exciting. Walking with so many who care. Walking with so many who know opportunity isn't given, it's taken. You don't want to wait. You can't wait. You keep walking and you keep moving forward. Forward towards freedom, forward towards equality, forward towards a world where everyone is celebrated for who they are. You do this. You're doing this, and as you finally arrive, you realize that the water running down the side of your face isn't sweat. You're out there with everyone else trying to ensure equal rights for everyone, regardless of race, regardless of gender, and you are finally cognizant of the fact that you're crying. You're crying real freaking tears, and it isn't even the fact that the march needed to happen or that the cause was worthy. It's the people, everyone together, everyone walking together that's the thing that gets you. You're out there doing it because you believe in the human race. You believe in yourself. And as the crowd cheers and calls for equality, you cry. You cry because you know, just like everyone else there, you cry because you know you are making a difference. Making a difference is a concept we all strive to be associated with, but in truth, it can be a lot more complicated. Resistance is defined as the opposition by one thing against another. Making a difference, in its simplest form, is really just that, a little bit of pushback, a willingness to say, hey, that doesn't seem right, or more significantly, as Rosa Parks once said, I had no idea that history was being made. I was just tired of giving in. Opposition is something we can all understand, and it's amazing how our everyday lives are layered with human examples. As I write this, the San Francisco Giants were knocked out of the 2016 National League playoffs by the Chicago Cubs. There it is, opposition. I mean, this is extremely moving away from the serious topic of equality, but on a much broader scale, it clearly demonstrates opposition. Do you have family? Kids? You ever have to put those kids to bed? Well, if you do, I'm sure that you've experienced some resistance, and I'm pretty sure you experience it every single night. What about those of you with a boss who hates every single one of your ideas and makes you feel like you have to fight to be heard in every meeting? Yep, that's resistance as well. Have you ever spent some time picking up pennies off the floor, maybe scourging through the seats of your car in an attempt to scrap together enough to purchase a tiny meal for yourself? Opposition, just another daily battle. How about those of you who spend your days fighting your own mind, fighting to try to eat one less carb or one less unit of gluten? Yep, there it is again. Opposition or resistance, or as some of us like to refer to it, life. It's not about being perfect. It's about making an attempt to do the right thing. Sometimes small steps help us get closer to the men or the women we want to be. Sometimes the battles are the moments we cherish most because they help us realize what we are truly capable of. It's a complicated world. There's a lot going on out there, and we can't always be on the right side of every issue. It's just not possible. Sometimes just going out and doing your best has to be enough. One American who exemplifies this concept was a man by the name of Henry Clay. So who was Henry Clay? Henry Clay was a politician by trade, but only after he transitioned out of a relatively successful career as a lawyer. Here's a little fun fact, a little fun entwined moment for you, unrelated to this specific story. Henry Clay actually defended Aaron Burr at one point in time. In fact, the very same year he worked with Burr, Clay was appointed to the U.S. Senate, which began his political career. If you don't know who Aaron Burr is, then, well, you're missing out, and you likely didn't pay attention in the 7th grade. That, or potentially, you never caught that Got Milk commercial back in the early 90s. Over the years, Clay was a senator. He was also in the House of Representatives and eventually became Speaker of the House as well as Secretary of State. For Clay, unfortunately, it was always a bridesmaid and never a bride because he failed to be elected president after running for the position on 5 separate occasions. Clay garnered a lot of respect and was a well-liked politician. While holding his various roles in government, he actually tackled some pretty significant issues most politicians were not willing to touch. The kind of issues people pretend don't really exist. His highlight reel includes working on independence for Latin American republics and helping to limit slavery, which resulted in keeping the peace as America expanded into the West. Henry Clay played a major role in the negotiation of the Missouri Compromise, which passed in 1820. The North and the South had dramatically different ideas about slavery in the United States, which created problems as the nation continued its expansion. Real dilemmas and eventual battles were born out of the problem of whose rules would be followed. Leading up to the Missouri Compromise, the U.S. Senate at the time was made up of 22 states. Now remember, this is 1819 we're talking about. So these 22 states were divided equally into 11 slave states and 11 non-slave states, and little old Missouri wanted to join the party as a slave state. This would dramatically disrupt the balance of power in the Senate, and the slave states would have the upper hand. This was a huge deal, like a really big deal, because if the South improved their ability to pass bills in favor of expanding slavery laws, it would further upset the balance of power and likely quickly spread slavery west into the new territories. Expanding slavery was clearly a terrible idea, and many Northern senators suggested all new states be forced to be non-slave states. Enter Mr. Compromise, Henry Clay. He had an idea to make both North and South leadership happy, but more importantly, effectively eliminate the expansion of slavery into the West. So Clay's plan was twofold. First, he suggested Missouri be allowed into the Union as a slave state, but planned to bring balance to the Senate floor by allowing Maine admission as well as a non-slave state. This added 2 states, bringing the total to 12 slave states and 12 non-slave states. Okay, don't freak out. Yes, the southern-minded Missouri was added to the Union, but there was a part 2 to this plan. The second part was more significant and a pretty big step towards individual rights for slaves. Clay also suggested that slavery would not be allowed in any new state that entered the Union north of the Missouri border and within the boundaries of the Louisiana Purchase. Some of you may have remembered that Mr. McKay covered the Louisiana Purchase in episode 10, but it basically took up about 1/3 of the landmass smack dab in the middle of the United States. Henry Clay was a thinker And in addition to equal rights, he also dabbled in global politics, which in the 1800s was completely different than it is today. You see, Clay knew that as the United States expanded, it could include the annexation of Texas from Mexico, which he warned would definitely provoke a war with our neighbors to the south. Almost around the exact time the Missouri Compromise was being signed, Mexico gained their independence from Spain. Now that Texas was no longer under Spanish control, United States citizens began to migrate, and many would eventually settle in the Texas area. Keeping with tradition, these new settlers provided resistance and demanded independence from their host nation, which was quickly brought to a head with the Battle of the Alamo. The Battle of the Alamo wasn't a huge step in the anti-slavery movement. In fact, some would argue it was a pretty big step backwards as, well, really just Steve Austin introduced slavery into the territory. However, the Alamo was in fact a symbol of historical resistance, and those who fought that day would forever be remembered for their contributions, which included the ultimate sacrifice. The Battle of the Alamo is well known. It's well chronicled, and in fact, some say it's pretty much all they remember about Texas history. For those of you who don't remember the Alamo, here's a brief summary. Colonel William Travis was the leader of the Texan forces, and James Bowie was in charge of the volunteer portion of the army. The men who fought never numbered more than 200, and most of the people who fought to defend the Alamo died during the 13 days it took to end the conflict. I'm going to go ahead and name drop a little bit here just for a second. Some of the famous men who opposed General Santa Anna were Sam Houston, Davy Crockett, James Bowie, William Travis, and a whole bunch of folks who have counties in Texas named after them. As the Battle of the Alamo came to a close, a second cousin of Henry Clay sprung onto the political scene. Henry's cousin, one General Clay, was about a half a generation behind Henry and shared a lot of the same political views as his cousin. He was also anti-slavery and considered an abolitionist who favored the gradual emancipation of slaves through legal means. In fact, as a slave owner, he founded an anti-slavery newspaper called The True American, and he freed all of his own slaves. General Clay was a member of the Whig Party, like his cousin, and later on he heavily supported Abraham Lincoln for president. General Clay believed he played a tremendously huge role in Abraham Lincoln's decision to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed the slaves who lived in the Confederate States. General Clay was a fighter, and often referred to the fights he took part in over the years fondly. Clay wasn't promoted to general because he was passive, as resistance had become a large part of his life. In fact, the man was not afraid to tussle, which was mostly due to his reported skill with a Bowie knife. The Bowie knife was a knife named after the leader of the Volunteer Army, James Bowie, in the Battle of the Alamo in 1836. The very same day the Battle of the Alamo was coming to a close, there was a significant fixture in American history opening its doors for the first time. This eventual landmark and beacon of opposition was the Missouri State Penitentiary in Jefferson City, Missouri. The prison was huge and served for many years as a maximum security prison. In addition to a whole bunch of paranormal stuff, this prison is famous for some of the people who called it their home. A few of those famous inmates are people like William Pretty Boy Floyd, Kate Richards O'Hare, Sonny Liston, and James Earl Ray. Sonny Liston was born in 1930 in Arkansas. I say 1930 because I haven't really been able to lock down an exact date. Some sources say 1929, and some have him being born as late as 1932. Liston was a part of a large family and was able to lay claim to 24 brothers and sisters. Yep, you heard me right. No need to hit the 10-second back button on your iPhones because you heard me correct. I absolutely said 24 brothers and sisters. Liston, like most of his siblings, grew up working in the cotton fields with his father and faced resistance on a daily basis. Unfortunately, Papa Liston was not tremendously supportive, and many reports claim he was essentially an abusive alcoholic who eventually forced Liston out of the house at a very, very young age. Liston was an African-American boy growing up in the 40s and found himself arrested almost 20 times before 1950. Liston was sent to jail for robbery and spent over 2 years in the Missouri State Penitentiary. While doing time, Liston was introduced to the sport of boxing. He spent 2 full years practicing and learning to box, and when he was finally released on parole, he immediately claimed a Golden Glove. Liston was a beast, and he came out of prison with all of the rage and physical ability of a champion. Boxing at its core is built on opposition and the idea of providing resistance. Think about it this way. Boxers often find victory through resistance, combined with waiting the other player out long enough for them to tire and eventually be unable to shield themselves from devastating blows. Sonny, like many top contenders, continued to fight until people thought he was virtually invincible. Liston won bout after bout after bout against pretty good competition like Don Smith, Marty Marshall, and in 1962, a man named Floyd Patterson. The 60s were a crazy time in America. Reflect just a moment on how much was going on. There was political change, civil rights, a growing economy, self-discovery, and more importantly, the birth of tie-dye. While Sonny Liston was facing opposition in the ring, another famous inmate took up residence in the Missouri State Pen. A man by the name of James Earl Ray was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 20 years with limited ability for parole. That means he would have had to stay in prison until he passed away, was transferred, or escaped. Ray was openly racist, and his time in jail did little to reform his feelings on the subject. Ray was a career criminal who, like Liston, had been in and out of jail for most of his life, but he wouldn't be in for long because he managed to leverage a bread delivery van into an escape vessel during the mid-60s. James Earl Ray spent a lot of time on the run, which included time in Canada and in Mexico. James Earl Ray and Sonny Liston may have been 2 of the most famous inmates, but it wasn't just because they were famous for what they did to land in prison. Mr. Liston may be most well known for a boxing match he fought and lost. Sonny Liston dropped Floyd Patterson and wanted to parlay that moment into another blockbuster bout with none other than Muhammad Ali. Liston and Ali, who was the underdog, went 7 rounds in the title bout, and after a knockout blow from Ali, Liston was unable to provide enough resistance to stand up and continue to fight. Muhammad Ali is one of boxing's most prolific fighters, which was all brought on because someone stole his bicycle back when he was 12. Ali was born in 1942 in Kentucky, and after his bike was stolen, he took up boxing and trained with the very police officer who responded to the scene after the bike theft. Ali was a courageous fighter and was never afraid of an opponent. He fought many worthy men over the years, including men from around the world. Many of you remember Muhammad Ali from his Olympic gold-winning fight with Zbigniew Petrovsky. Ali was and will forever be the champ. In addition to boxing, Ali was a proponent for civil rights and found spiritual and civil leadership from Malcolm X. Muhammad Ali, now part of the Nation of Islam, was starting to insert himself into more and more civil rights causes. One of the causes he was outspoken of at the time was the Vietnam War, which, honestly, between us, was very easy to be in opposition of. Ali refused to be drafted and serve in the military back in 1967, which ended up with him being arrested and facing felony charges. Being arrested was something he had in common with Sonny Liston, which led to Ali almost being stripped of his boxing title at the same time. I mean, this was a huge deal, and it wouldn't be until 1971 that the Supreme Court overturned his conviction for draft evasion. While Muhammad Ali was fighting in the ring for civil rights of so many African Americans, there was another man active in the civil rights movement throughout the 60s. A man who had a birthday just 2 short days from when Muhammad Ali was born. A man by the name of Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. is a well-known figure in American history, and may be most famous for his I Have a Dream speech and a battle to overturn Jim Crow segregation laws. It was his stated goal to eliminate social and economic differences between blacks and whites. King was so dynamic and effective in his attempts throughout the civil rights movement that he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Those of you who have listened to the show know we don't spend extensive amounts of time on each figure, but Martin Luther King Jr. is absolutely deserving of his own show or shows. This small and mostly redacted summary doesn't even come close to doing the man justice. Eventually, King found himself in Memphis, Tennessee to try and alleviate the working conditions for some sanitation workers. King scheduled a massive march to further the agenda of the sanitation worker, and before the march was over, King was assassinated. He was 39 years old. The man who shot King fled the United States and spent time in Canada. A Toronto magazine even reported that the man lived under an assumed name in a building right across the street from where Muhammad Ali trained while getting ready to fight a title bout in Canada. After being identified, the man fled overseas to Europe, where he would remain for several months. He was on the run and doing a pretty darn good job of evading authorities. It wasn't until 1968 when the man was captured while trying to fly out of London's Heathrow Airport. The man who shot and killed Martin Luther King Jr. was a man who spent time in the Missouri Penitentiary, a man by the name of James Earl Ray. Oh, but our story does not stop there. Muhammad Ali, well, he wasn't always called Muhammad Ali, now was he? In fact, he was actually named after a general in the American Army named Cassius Marcellus Clay. Cassius Clay, the boxer, fought in the ring for years before dropping his slave name in favor of his free name, Muhammad Ali. Ali or Clay, it really doesn't make much of a difference because they were the same person fighting the same battles. There is one biographer who published a book chronicling the Clay family history, which has been traced back to Henry Clay, the father and architect of the Missouri Compromise. Ali himself, aware of the suggested lineage, walked up to a statue of Henry Clay and said, "Oh, is that what my great-grandfather looked like?" Now, is it true he is actually related to Henry Clay? Well, we don't know for sure because there are large gaps in the Clay family history which make it nearly impossible to trace for sure, but we do know there is at least one family member who has made this claim. One fact we know for sure is Muhammad Ali, or Cassius Clay, was absolutely named after General Cassius Marcellus Clay, the abolitionist and emancipationist of the 1800s, with or without relation. This is a tale that spans over a century, but despite the time that passes, it's amazing that no matter what the cause, no matter what you're fighting for, courage comes at a significantly high price. Opposition and resistance play a key role in our lives and will continue to as long as there are those who demonstrate bravery and a willingness to do the right thing. We can all make a difference. We can all make an effort to push back when needed and ask the tough questions. And in the words of Miss Rosa Parks, we need to all just get a little tired of giving in. Thank you for listening. This has been Entwined. Entwined is a podcast that releases every other week and is written, recorded, edited, and produced by Elliot Gladstone and P.S. McKay. This episode was written by Elliot Gladstone. Please tune in next time to see what P.S. McKay has in store for us. For more information about the show or the authors, please check out entwinedpodcast.com or visit our Twitter page at entwinedpodcast.